Let's try to talk about 1332 SMJ involving non-US citizens, which is a tricky case, especially with the so-called permanent resident bar. You won't see those terms, permanent resident bar, in the statute, but there is a bar to 1332 if you have a non-US citizen who is admitted to permanent resident in some cases, as we will explain. Now, let's start with a review. 1332, often called the diversity jurisdiction statute, always has two components. There has to be an amount in controversy, which you see at the top, over $75,000, and there are certain flavors of this. So this all involves some kind of citizenship. So the most basic type is A1, citizens of different states, which the Supreme Court has interpreted to require complete diversity of citizenship. So in other words, all the plaintiffs are from a different state than all the defendants. But things get even more complicated with all the other provisions under A. So provisions A2 through 4 are what are commonly referred to as alienage provisions. So this is a culturally insensitive but often used title referred to disputes that all have a U.S. citizen and one or more citizens from a non-U.S. country. So 2 through 4 are all in a separate category. So our focus is going to be on A2 in particular. So before we continue on, remember that 1332 separates individuals into two general categories. We have U.S. citizens who are domiciled in a U.S. state, living there with an intent to remain there indefinitely, or we have non-U.S. citizens, what is sometimes called in the cases aliens. Those are the categories here. So you could be a French national, but for purposes of this statute, you're simply a non-U.S. citizen. The statute doesn't care which is your country of origin. Okay, now focusing on 1332A2 and the highlighted provision. This is what I'm calling the permanent resident bar. Now, why am I calling it a bar? Well, because the writing in red is a bar to 1332. It's saying even if you have an amount in controversy, and even if you have a U.S. state citizen under 1332 versus a non-U.S. citizen, in some cases there is no 1332 if that highlighted language all exists. So what does that mean? Now let's take another look. Sometimes people think that permanent residents are actual U.S. state citizens. But if you take a look at the highlighted language, that's not what it says. So here it talks about an action between citizens of a state, i.e. the U.S. citizens, and citizens or subjects of a foreign state, non-U.S. citizens who are lawfully admitted. It doesn't say anything about how the lawfully admitted residents are citizens. It says if the permanent residents are domiciled, living with an intent to stay in a U.S. state, then this critical red part applies. There is no 1332 citizenship. So let's try an example. When would you have a bar? So in other words, you already have a mountain controversy and you say have one U.S. state citizen, say Florida, versus a permanent resident. Scenario 1, U.S. citizen is from Texas, and then you also have an Illinois citizen on the other side, as well as a permanent resident who is domiciled in Massachusetts. So here, the non-U.S. citizen is domiciled in Massachusetts, which is a different state than Texas. So there is no bar. Let's try another example. In this case, all I change is that now the permanent resident resides in Illinois. So Illinois is different than Texas, so we still don't have a bar. Now, one more situation. Now, the thing I change is now that the permanent resident resides in Texas, which is the same domicile as the party on the opposite side. So what you should see is that if you have the permanent resident domiciled in the same state as the opposing party, that destroys 1332 SMJ. If the permanent resident lives in any other state and domiciled there, there is no bar. So it's a very limited situation where 1332 would be barred. Hopefully that helps a little to clarify what is admittedly a tricky part of 1332 to read.